The scandal isn't that Prince Harry sued the tabloids, it's that the courtroom started suing his story right back, and his own legal team basically ran for the exits. Picture it, London, the Royal Courts of Justice, all that wood, all that power, all that we are not here for your feelings. And there he is, Prince Harry. Suit crisp, face not. The kind of tight-jawed, hollow-eyed look that screams, I thought this was gonna be my victory lap. Why does it feel like a public execution? Because here's what nobody wants to say out loud, but everyone in that courtroom could feel. This wasn't just a case. This was Harry trying to put the press on trial for his life. He didn't walk in asking for justice. He walked in demanding a verdict on his pain. And the room? The room was cold. And then, the first crack happened. Not in the headlines, not in the judge's tone. In something far nastier, his legal team started quitting. Not a quiet reshuffle, not a mutual decision, not moving on to other opportunities. No. This was a strategic vanishing act. The kind of professional exit that whispers, we've seen enough. We're not going down with this ship. You know how bad it has to get for lawyers to peel off mid-war? Lawyers don't just leave because it's messy. They leave when the story they're defending starts collapsing under cross-examination, when the evidence starts smirking back, when the judge's patience starts looking like a candle in a hurricane. And while Harry is sitting there trying to look like a man in control, the vibe around him is giving something else entirely. Isolated. Dwarfed. Like the whole building is too big for him, and the moment is too heavy. Now let's get to the part that makes this so painfully awkward it practically sweats. Harry's case is built on one core emotion. They did this to me. They invaded. They crossed lines. And look, the tabloids have done vile things. Historically, everybody knows that. But the courtroom doesn't run on everybody knows. It runs on receipts. And once the defense started talking, the story got complicated. Uncomfortably complicated. Because suddenly the people he's pointing at, the journalists he's accusing, they're not showing up as faceless villains in trench coats. They're showing up as people with names, careers, and memories that don't match his script. Let's talk about the name that hit the room like a dropped glass, Katie Nicholl. He's saying she's part of criminal information gathering, but the defense slides in with something so socially specific it's almost humiliating. She wasn't lurking outside your life, Harry. She was invited inside it. A party. Kensington Roof Gardens, 2011. And not a she snuck in situation, not a someone let her through. The claim, stated like it's obvious, is that she was personally invited. Meaning, at some point, the vibe between them was friendly enough for a come-party invite. And you can practically hear the defense's tone even without them saying it. So which is it? A dangerous stalker or a guest you welcomed? The alleged response attributed to her is the kind of blunt, personal slap that doesn't even bother dressing up as legal argument. No, Harry, you invited me. That line alone? That's not just a rebuttal, that's a reframing. It turns the story from Prince versus predators into Prince versus his own past. And that is the slipperiest battlefield of all, because you can't cross-examine nostalgia, but you can cross-examine contradictions. And then there's Rebecca English, another name Harry's side drags into the spotlight. The allegation, an email from 2010, supposedly showing her asking for flight details connected to Harry's then-girlfriend Chelsea Davy. The kind of thing Harry's team wants to paint as sneaky, invasive, private jet backchannel behavior. But the defense basically shrugs and says, that proves what, exactly? That a royal reporter did royal reporting? And that's what makes this whole thing so viciously tricky. Because Harry is trying to draw a thick red line between journalism and criminality, and the defense is trying to blur it into a messy gray smudge called, this is how access worked when you were a working royal. Meaning, if you were inside the machine, greeting reporters, attending events, existing as a public figure, then the press wasn't always breaking in. Sometimes they were simply showing up where the doors were already open. And ooh, does that ruin the clean hero-villain narrative. Now let's zoom out, because the courtroom drama isn't just about what's being said, it's about what's missing. Because while Harry is sitting there in London, the city he says haunted him, the battlefield he claims he had to flee, there's one absence so loud it's practically clapping. Meghan isn't there. No handhold walk in, no supportive presence in the gallery, no I'm standing by my husband visual, just distance. Montecito distance. And for a couple whose entire brand has been us against the world, this looks less like privacy and more like a quiet strategic retreat. This chapter is his, not ours. Because here's the ugly truth gossip never ignores. When the narrative is winning, everyone shows up. When it starts wobbling, people suddenly have priorities. They suddenly need to be with the children. They suddenly can't travel. And maybe that's all genuine. Maybe it is. But optics are optics. And in celebrity warfare, optics are blood. And Harry's optics in that courtroom? Not warrior, not crusader. More like a man watching the foundations of his identity get audited. You can see it in how the story is described around him. Strained, older looking, posture slumped, energy drained. And why wouldn't he be drained? This case isn't a side quest for him. It's a cornerstone. It's part of the bigger We Were Wronged architecture that holds up documentaries, interviews, books, the whole modern Sussex universe. So when the courtroom starts pushing back, when journalists come alive as credible professionals rather than cartoon villains, it doesn't just threaten a legal outcome. It threatens the emotional thesis of his post-royal life. And then, just when you think it can't get more brutal, those legal resignations start looking less like paperwork and more like prophecy. Because legal analysts, the kind who don't care about feelings and definitely don't care about royal titles, basically interpret it as, if your solicitors leave now, it's because the instructions are unsustainable or the case is shifted in a catastrophic way. Translation in plain gossip speak? The people closest to the strategy saw the direction of the wind and didn't want their names attached when it hit the ground. And that's when you realize what the judge's sternness really means in these moments. It's not just discipline. It's a warning shot. This is a court, not a confessional. Bring proof, not pain. So here we are. Harry came in trying to crown himself as the man who finally made the tabloids pay. But inside that courtroom, the narrative is getting peeled back. Not with outrage, not with mockery, but with something far worse, cold, methodical doubt. And once doubt enters the room, everything starts to look different. Even the victim, even the villain, even the war. And here's where the atmosphere fully shifts. Because once doubt settles in a courtroom, it doesn't sit quietly. It prowls, it watches. It waits for you to trip over your own certainty. Harry doesn't explode in some cinematic outburst, no shouting, no table slamming. That's the irony. The losing it everyone whispers about isn't loud, it's internal. It's the slow realization that the room is no longer leaning toward him. That the sympathetic nods he expected have turned into raised brows and clipped questions. That the judge isn't hostile, just unimpressed. And indifference? That's the most dangerous response of all. Because the judge's warning lands not as drama, but as finality. A reminder that this isn't therapy. This isn't a memoir sequel. This is law. And law does not bend for trauma alone. Harry keeps pushing the same emotional pressure point, intrusion, paranoia, betrayal, but the courtroom keeps responding with dates, emails, invitations, timelines. And suddenly his lived experience is being sliced into sections, dissected, and compared against records he doesn't control. That's when frustration starts to bleed through his composure. You can feel it tightening his jaw, slowing his answers, sharpening his tone just enough to notice. This is the part nobody prepared him for. Because outside that courtroom, emotion is power. Inside it, emotion without corroboration becomes vulnerability. And vulnerability, when challenged, starts to look like instability, not morally, but strategically. The legal exits now make brutal sense. This wasn't about loyalty, it was about trajectory. They saw the slope, they knew where this was headed, and they stepped aside before the narrative swallowed them too. What makes this sting harder is the silence afterward. No triumphant statement, no rallying press appearance, no confident walkout, just a man leaving the building quieter than he entered it, carrying the weight of a case that no longer feels like a crusade, but a gamble. And the biggest twist? The tabloids didn't need to win outright. All they needed was for the story to crack. Because once the public sees that the tale isn't clean, that it's layered, messy, contradictory, the myth fractures. Not because Harry lied, but because memory, pain, and perception don't always survive cross-examination. So this ends not with a bang, but with a question hanging in the air, heavier than any verdict. What happens when the story that saved you starts asking for proof? And worse, what happens when the room stops believing it owes you sympathy just for surviving it? That's the real loss unfolding here. Not money, not reputation, control. And once control slips in a courtroom like that, it rarely comes back. Rarely comes back. Rarely comes back.